Bungalow Bill here. I've done a bit of work on the Tycho, and let's see what I've done. So I've built out the subsystems for the most part. So out of laziness, I'm using steam turbines to power the railguns and provide the battery energy for them. So we've got 3 railguns. We've got about 3 steam turbines of equivalent size. The reason here being that this craft, because of its fairly large size for its cost to hold all the helium that it's going to take to keep it airborne, is going to be subject to having holes put in it with railguns. So it needs to not just have any one singular system like one large steam engine, where getting taken out will just cripple the entire craft. I will put heavier armor around turrets and AI and that sort of stuff, but not much heavier armor. The stuff is sort of placed randomly on the inside, which I will fix at some point. Like, this is the mainframe. I'm going to do something a little bit different than I've done before, and I'm just going to put the mainframe and AI components that are absolutely critical for the craft to function in the heaviest armor. And then the GPP is going to sit around where it's used, because, you know, if the detection that it belongs to gets blown up, it doesn't really matter if the processing power gets blown up as well. There's a bunch of stuff like, this is approximately how much ammo I'm going to need. Obviously, I'm not just going to throw it in one place. A lot of the stuff, like, there's a superstructure and substructure, they're just sort of placeholders. They'll probably get changed a little bit. I'm going to mess around with some of the transitions as well, and possibly chop the vehicle up in a few places and move it around to get the various lengths to meet up as best as I can to try to avoid using too many 1-meter blocks. Depending on where I can place these little Sea-Whiz guns as well, I might take about 16 meters off the front. Although, I do want these Sea-Whiz guns to be able to shoot on either side. They're not huge, so it's not a huge loss if they can't, but I'd rather they could. Although, I think these will look kind of cool, so I'm going to leave them as is. I am going to extend the neck by 2 meters so that they'll sit under some deck armor. And there's a little bit of a particle cannon in the back, which these are all synced up to 1, and they'll fire in sequence. So there's one firing like every 0.83 seconds. Out of the custom jets in this craft, these are the only ones that are going to stay. They give it thrust. These other ones, well, it's still going to need some sort of turning thrust, but it's not going to have such a massive CJE right in the front to do it. I'll figure something else out. But these other ones that are keeping it airborne right now are all going to go and get replaced by helium. So let's give it a bit of a systems test. We are on God mode. Let's spawn in something to shoot at. We'll do something fairly kind to us to begin with, Rhea, which is a absolutely massive block of armor. And we'll see our routines a little bit, how our craft looks when it's fighting. Make sure that we're actually shooting with everything. And then take a quick look at the Rhea. Now, we are currently shooting a bit of a party mix. We've got just about everything. I'm trying different things on different railguns. So it's got AP frag, it's got AP HE, and it has hollow point frag. So far, the hollow point frag is doing the worst. We just hit something important, didn't we? It's AI dead. So yeah, when you shoot big railguns like this, that's a real slowdown. Sometimes you just hit an AI and the craft dies. If you have to actually kill all of the metal in the Rhea, it's going to take a long time. But the Rhea is usually a fun target. So I've been sort of keeping track of the relative performance of the railguns, which these numbers just seem pretty typical for railguns in general. I do think this is not going to stay here. It's just I was testing how much anti-missile stuff I actually needed. These are the hollow points. They've been performing the worst. But these are just fairly typical numbers on average for railguns. Let's spawn in something else to look at while I'm talking. Actually, let's do something a little bit smaller, but I find fairly tough. Given the performance that I've been looking at so far from my craft, from some previous tests, I don't think it's going to be an amazing craft as you sort of expect from something that's going to be powered by helium. It's a bit slow, it's a bit bulky, so it's going to take a lot of incoming fire. It's fairly wide and large, so the armor's going to be a bit dispersed. The weapons, I don't think, are completely optimal. Well, I know they're not completely optimal, but I don't think the type is the exact best, so it'll probably come out to be like expert equivalent as far as the AI craft are concerned. I'm trying to figure out what the best use of these armor-piercing payload rounds is, because sort of on one hand, if they're tuned perfectly so they explode in the juicy internals of the enemy vehicle, I mean, they seem fantastic, but I'm not really inclined to set a penetration depth and have them blow up early against some craft. That just seems like potentially a really bad thing to have happen. And for the same cost, I could just be putting more shells with the same kinetic power downrange that just don't have the payload and just put more holes in the enemy craft. And that just seems like a better thing to be doing. I mean, here you saw sort of the best case. There was a armor-piercing high explosive that went off dead center in the middle of that turret. But putting a rail shell all the way through the turret has a pretty similar effect. You don't have to take out many components of an APS gun to completely neutralize it. Depending on how lucky you are, it's really just one or two. I mean, we're seeing when we get the right hits in here, they're pretty crippling. But that's really true of all railguns. So, I don't know. I think if I'm trying to make something that's really good, I would still just stick with normal rails. And I mean, I would also make a thrustercraft front-sider. But I mean, like, this isn't going to beat the Kobold or something like that, especially not the new Kobold. Looks like we blew up the block I was following. But at the same time, this is going to be fairly economical. It doesn't cost anything to keep it airborne. The power that goes into the rails, because there's a lot of space on the inside of this craft, so I don't feel the need to make immensely dense components. The steam turbines are going to be very efficient at providing power for the rails. It's not going to be going really fast, so there's not for its size, there's not a huge amount of fuel burn in the custom jet engines. Just think, in general, with it having very low running costs, I won't have to outfit it with as many materials at the outset, and that's going to make it effectively cheaper than it is, because I don't have to load so many materials. Something like the Anubis that burns through huge amounts of materials in battle needs maybe a third of its cost as a decent material load if I'm planning on doing a lot of fighting with it. Something like this, well, I really think that this can get away with, I don't know, maybe a quarter or even less. So right now, this is sitting at a cost of around 500,000. My goal cost is about 600,000, and we're gonna lose a fair amount of cost in custom jet engines. So this is carrying almost everything I want it to carry, with the exception of some engines and shield projectors. It's going to need a few. I'm probably going to use fuel engines that I build myself for the shield projectors, and that's it. Everything else is in here. So we're going to have about 150,000, maybe a little bit more to spend on armor, and I think that'll put it in a pretty good place. It might be, the CGEs in this are really expensive. It might be closer to 200,000 to get us around the 30% armor cost. It's a very weak particle cannon, but I've actually been kind of impressed with impressed with its performance. So once I've done the Tycho under, I might do a particle cannon craft. I really don't know, but I'm gonna destroy one more ship just for one more data point. So the tier isn't really the most vicious ship anymore. I'm not sure it's so much that it's gotten worse or just so much that the standards have gotten better. It is an old craft, though. Its lambs are powerful enough that they will pop a few shells. I don't think it's the lambs aren't a huge deal, and there's a real chance that we'll just... I think I'm grabbing onto a turret right now. And there's a reasonable chance... this follow camera's not working right now. There's a reasonable chance that we'll put a hole in the lambs very quickly. But it is still fairly resilient. It's got heavy armor around the turrets. The turrets don't just pop, so this is a case where having a shell detonate inside of them could potentially be way better. It does increase the area that we have that'll actually cripple the turret. But at the same time, we are worse at getting through heavy armor than we would be if we were using pure kinetic rounds, or if I put less chemical payload in these rounds. So our chance of actually penetrating through the turret is significantly worse. I'm looking for the black text that says AI dead. I'm not sure if it just can't... it probably just can't aim at us. It's not that it's AI dead. It's only down to 87% though. That hit was pretty good though into that turret. It looks like it reduced the gauge considerably on all 3 barrels. So its APS firepower is almost 0 now. It's not particularly floating well either, or turning very quickly, so to me that suggests its engine power is quite low. The tier is quite reliant on its engines to stay reasonably fighting, and if it loses them, it can definitely either capsize or pitch down too much. I guess it still is rotating a little bit, so it must have some engine power. So, these are definitely fun rounds, and especially when you're firing down through the deck a little bit like this, you can get some pretty scary shots off if you hit at the right angle. But for maximum effectiveness, I think I would still go with rail shells. Or maybe even a much faster, or a much larger barrage of slower chemical shells, which I could also do for the same cost. But I could still boost them up fairly quick, 600 meters per second or something like that. And just pepper it with an overwhelming amount of hash. Still, I think all those options... I think the game is starting to get balanced to the point where all of those options are at least reasonably competitive with each other. It's not like you make one of those options and it's just completely non-viable. You're, I don't know, at most losing 10 to 20% effectiveness by choosing the wrong one. So you can at least have fun and kind of build what you want to have. Looks like the tier's time is coming to an end pretty soon. So this will be our last test fire. It looks like we're sustaining our energy well enough. Ammo's holding out. We have way too many fuel boxes because I just stuck a bunch on the CJEs. I'm going to be pulling a lot of those out. But components are working fairly well. So I'm going to square the inside of the ship away, try to put all of the components where they belong, and then get back for another iteration on the ribs of the ship, figuring out what I'm going to do with the missile interceptors. I don't think I'm going to keep these small interceptor turrets. I'm going to do something a little bit different with them. The same thing with the mediums. These used to be small interceptor turrets, and I just sort of stuck medium missiles on the front because they do twice the damage per cost per barrage. They reload slower, but their initial barrage is is much stronger, and the large missiles on the Stralsund, I couldn't really do much without some amount of medium interceptors. So square away these turrets, figure that sort of thing out. And then after that, I'm going to be moving on to armor, but the armor I think is going to be a separate episode. So this episode is mostly going to be about squaring away the internals, figuring out the transitions, the outside of the ship, maybe the superstructure shape a little bit more, get some ideas about the turret caps, because these mantlets and stuff, they're all going to slide back towards the back of the turret a little bit. And these aren't going to have a big turret cap, so that's not going to be the case, but as I mentioned, too taller so that I can fit turret caps and so that these mantlets won't just be sitting in the deck. Anyway, I'm going to pause the recording and get back after I've done a little bit more work. We are back. Now, for you, that was just a moment. For me, that was a long couple of days. Pretty much everyone else on my team with similar knowledge compared to me of the area of the product I work in has been gone, so I've been doing a lot of code reviews, but I've still had some time to work on this vehicle. So I said I'd spread all the pieces up into components or into compartments, and I have done that. There are a bunch of interior compartments on this housing all of the components I was showing before. They have helium pumps in them, so the custom jet engines strapped to the bottom are now gone. All that we have are CJEs to turn and custom jet engines to push us forwards. Now, I do realize that these are too high. They're about 4 blocks too high, actually. I'm going to move them down. I'm only going to move them down 3 blocks because it'll line them up well with other stuff in the craft to look good, I think, which will mean that I will have to reshape a lot of this transition work a little bit. And I still need to shorten the bow. I did some work to the bow without reshortening it, but there's a lot of excess room here, so I can bring it back the 16 meters that I was talking about. And there are 2 reasons that I want to do that. One, we're at 570,000 materials and 26% armor cost, and I haven't even finished skinning this, much less beefing up the armor around more important components. And 2, we have too much flotation at the bow. It is too buoyant. There's too much empty space there. So we're going to lose about 4 blocks in length here. That's going to push this transition back towards this area. And it's going to do a similar thing with this transition. It's going to come back as well. But it's not going to be a huge deal overall. I've also been messing around with a little bit of wainscoting for detail. I think, well, this is going to be about the same length as these panels. And I may reconfigure these panels to be squares so that they can fit this motif in it. What that means is that rather than being... So this is 9 blocks tall and 8 blocks wide, which kind of bothers me. The problem is it would have to be 9 blocks wide, which would add 1 extra block onto the side here. So I'm not sure if I'm going to do that or not. I might. I could also do things like push them closer together by making these 3 blocks. Just something for me to think about. It's not really going to come into play until later when I finish skinning it and try to make things a little bit more aesthetic. But for now, I need to shoot at something, and perhaps you would also like to look at me shooting something. I don't have very many metrics for my videos, but I do have enough to know that people watch the most. We need to be in God mode, we're not armored up all the way. The portions where I am shooting at something, and tend to skip to those in some of the videos. Not that I am just going to make videos all about me shooting things. So what I'm planning to do is, I did that, we need something else to shoot at. Let's do another Kingstead. We'll do a bulwark. These are relatively easy targets compared to the Stralsund and the Tyr and the other things I showed earlier. But so for this video, I'm going to do the aforementioned pieces of shortening up the bow, moving the thrusters down, and then that's it. That's going to be the end of this video. for the next one, I'm going to skin the vehicle, extend any interior components out to the walls, and then try to selectively armor up anything I can, and then add in active defenses with any amount of money that I have left. So missile interceptors, shields, and then some fuel engines that I'm going to build to power the shields. I will do one video after that, so it'll be video 4. It's hoping it'll be a 4-part series, where it'll be the eponymous Putty and Paint episode of the Putty and Paint series. So this is going to get the ostentatious black, white, teal, and gold color scheme that I give to a lot of my other expensive vehicles. And then I'll do just general other tweaking around transitions and tweaking motifs or adding in some design cues from some other vehicles to sort of tie the fleet together a little bit. You can see a few here already that we have some of the design cues from the Dandelion currently in this. The glass is colored with just one of the default translucent colors so that I can see it. I'm going to change the glass coloration later. And then this sort of motif, which is new to this ship. So right now this is flying level because I have 5 degrees pitch up on these CJEs in the back, which is actually a little bit too much, which is part of the reason that we're nosing up right now. But I'm going to eliminate that when I bring the thrusters down, which, as soon as we're done with this bulwark, I'm going to pause the recording, tweak the thrusters because that's going to be easier, and then tweak the bow because it's going to take me more time. Then wrap up the recording, and probably get to a campaign episode before coming back to this. It's been taking me a pretty long time. I'll give a quick look at what the interior looks like though while we're doing this. So there is a lot of empty space right now, which a lot of this is going to go away when I shorten the bow. We're going to be losing 4 full beams worth of length. And then the other stuff is very spread out because I don't just want one hole in this thing to take out a lot of important things at the same time. We'll see. Depending on how this does when I start doing the armor testing next episode, I might get rid of the large steam turbines and switch them to mediums, because that'll make me a little bit more tolerant of railgun fire. We have our main AI. Turrets. Oh, whoops, this is our main AI. This is a sub-AI that I'm going to be using for AA. A duplicate pump, I'll fix that later. Interesting, I was building with mirror mode on. I wonder how I wound up with a duplicate pump. I am not seeing this unless we have a sub-object here. Has one neighboring pump. It's probably a duplicated pump. Do I have another one in the same... Oh, whoops. I forgot to put the armor on the bottom of the ammo here. I guess it's a good thing that I saw that. The other stuff isn't really going to touch the ground. I don't really care that much. And at some point, I'm also going to do the superstructure, substructure, cockpit, and then there are going to be some interior tunnels that sort of connect all of that stuff. We blasted off a little bit there. But yeah, we're a bit back heavy. So part of that'll get improved a little bit when I beef up the back end of the craft a little bit. We'll get some more volume here. We'll get a little bit more flotation here. I might move some weight forward as well as much as I can. And then some of it will be fixed when we just make the bow shorter. There's just way too much flotation up here. Anyway, I'm going to pause and get to work. Excellent. We are way more stable than we used to be. Our rear end is a little bit blocky looking, but we can fix that later. At the very least, thrusters have come down. We are not pitching up quite so hard. And that's with the pitch removed from the CJEs. So they're pushing directly through. I'm probably going to do something to make the rear end look a little bit sleeker, but I haven't exactly decided what yet. Now we're on to shortening up the front. I sort of like how the front looks, but I really just can't afford for it to be this long. So it's got to be reduced. You know what? Maybe I'll leave it like this. This is fine. Everything's fine. This is just doing a little bit of a deletion with the prefab tool. The actual changes are going to be slightly more extensive than this because I have to twiddle around with some of this stuff, but I don't think I have to remove much interior volume, so it's actually not going to be that bad. That'll just be able to tweak a little bit of stuff here and there, get rid of this gun, and then move the nose back those 16 blocks, and I should be pretty much good to go. There we go. I cut 16 meters off, brought these shapes back a little bit, raised this up enough to meet the turret necks, which I might change this at some point and end the slope a little bit early and then bring the turrets down 2 more meters. Might look better, might not. I kind of like some continuity in lines across the craft so that there's these lines that sort of go all the way and there's sort of these lines that go all the way. But then at the same time, there's lines that are curve out and curve back. So here I can either follow the entire craft or can look, then break, then look, then break, then look, then break. I feel like it's fun to have sort of a mixture of those two things, but I'm still going to play around with these looks for a little bit. Anyway, I've got Dungeons & Dragons in 5 minutes, so this will be the end of the episode. Hope that you enjoyed watching. I hope to see you all in the next one, and if you feel like hitting one of those dopamine buttons below the video, go right ahead. Or don't, I guess.